In our discussion on Watchtower's first trumpet blast, we looked at why the declaration of the challenge to world leaders and convention was so important to Watchtower. It was the 1923 Los Angeles Convention, when the Watchtower's second trumpet was released, that the interpretation of the parable of the sheep and goats became more Watchtower-centered. Join us for our discussion of our investigation into Watchtower's 1924 Columbus Convention. What was Watchtower's third trumpet? This third trumpet, or this talk that Rutherford gave on Civilization is Doomed at the Columbus, Ohio Convention of July 1924, is something that they still point back to today and say, this was a fulfillment of prophecy. This indictment, this resolution that they passed, was so significant in their history that I thought it was important to investigate it. What did they say at this convention? What does this indictment say? And what do they say about it today? And I wanted to fact check some of the claims that they make about it and see what historically holds up. Stay tuned. We'll get there in just a little bit. It's a very interesting discussion.
There we have the stadium where the third trumpet blast took place in 1923 in the Columbus, Ohio Convention.
And you can see some of the articles that were in the newspapers of the time period. I like this one that said, important news for our state. And they were looking forward to, 10, 15,000 individuals appearing at this convention. I was talking to a Jehovah's Witness friend of mine, and he's a historian as well. And he said, well, we don't really talk much about the third trumpet. We look mainly at the first one and the second one, but we very rarely talk about the third one. He really didn't know much about the third one. So this will be very interesting to dig into some of this history and see some of these points that are going on.
And that's odd, because there were 7 trumpets in Revelation. You would think they would make each one an important event, not just the first 2 or this or that. So I find it a little odd. Peculiar is maybe a better word.
And we're hoping to get to each one of these trumpets and to look at these interpretations and see what happened historically. This photograph of the Colosseum in Columbus, Ohio in 1924, that was actually from a postcard. And you could see I blew up the postcard, a color copy of that postcard. And then they had another one that was the same, almost the same perspective, but from a slightly different angle. This is the talk that Rutherford gave on Civilization is Doomed. And we're going to look a little bit at that talk later on and identify some of the points and compare it to Watchtower's current doctrinal ideas and see if they connect or match at all, as well as some of the claims that they make about this convention or have been made in the past. I find it interesting, again, that very little is known about this convention. So it was interesting to dig deep into this history. Watchtower history style, of course.
And I see the at the bottom of the newspaper article, no collection.
Right.
Which is,
but they did sell books, and we'll get into that in just a little bit.
A little different than the viewpoint today.
So this is probably the only known photograph that was taken that I was able to find at that convention. And it's Rutherford with a group of Italians. And this came from one of the Italian watchtowers of the time period. You could see how tall Rutherford is next to a lot of the other folks there. And that's Dekeka, who went to prison. He was one of the bunch that went to prison. His sentence was 10 years, whereas theirs were 20. So his sentence was half of the others. And why he went to prison and why they went to prison, that's a subject that we want to touch on in the future, as well as the claims that they make about it. But as we say, it's another story for another time. So how many attended this convention? It's hard to tell because there's different estimates made and different numbers used. A lot of times there's 10,000, 15,000 in the papers, 20,000. I've seen as much as up to 60,000. So How many were really there? It's hard to estimate. The papers don't say, and even Watchtower literature itself has various numbers. And that would include not just the Golden Age and the Watchtower, but also the New Era Enterprise at the time, the weekly secret newspaper, as we've discussed before.
So, what is your thoughts on why they couldn't get an accurate count? And I could see to the hundredth or whatever, but we're off by over 10,000 in some cases or more. What was the reasoning for that?
You ever tried to sit in a stadium and count heads? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, no, he moved. 1, 2,
Well,
3.
they
Oh, forget
know
it.
how many seats are there,
Yeah.
and you could easily say, okay, it looks like it's three-quarter full, and if it holds 20,000, we got about 15,000. If it looks like half, you could say, I mean, they're way off here.
And are they sitting only in the seats? This is a question that comes up later, and we'll see what that means.
Good,
But
good.
if you've ever heard the statement, keep off the grass, that becomes one of the most important stories coming out of this convention. Now, the baptism was done at a local amusement park, very close to the convention site. And these are postcards from the time period. And this would have been the baptismal pool that they would have used. These are not pictures from Watchtower, but they were postcards at the time. The Indianola Park in Columbus, Ohio. And these are time period from the early 1920s. Now, in some of those newspaper articles, they were expecting 700 to be baptized. The newspapers of the time period, several of them report 470. And there's one photo from the convention there. You can see the immersion there in the lower right corner. And it says 470 baptized at once. And there's a short article in one of the papers there that talks about how that baptism progressed.
And
But
realistically, the papers probably got their figures from the convention people.
you would assume so, but then why doesn't it match what we'll see later on for the actual figure that's given in the Golden Age and Watchtower? So it's not off by much, but you'd assume they would have got it from. Yeah. So here are some of those figures. They were planning for 700, but they got about 470.
And I'm going to defend them. You know, you can expect 700. I think today now they know ahead of time exactly. But I would say that wasn't too far off. You know, not a bad number.
But, you know, if the number were 700, that's quite a large number to be baptized. And so I think they're telling the number beforehand. We expect 700 because that was their whole scheme of advertise, advertise, advertise. So I think, you know, they were expecting this many that came to the convention. They got half. They were expecting this many baptisms. They got a little more than half.
And again, going back to, they did know who was going to get baptized ahead of time.
Yeah,
it's
usually.
not like anyone could just show up, hey, baptize me. You know, the Bible students, Joe's, were always, okay, what is your thoughts? What are your feelings? Do you go, and make you go through some sort of step. So
and remember,
they probably should have known.
Yeah, and remember, they were looking for the heavenly hope at that time.
Mm-hmm.
This was not the way the Watchtower currently handles their baptisms now. They were all heavenly hope.
Mm-hmm.
So that changed about a decade after this. And that's another discussion for another time as well. One that we really want to get into. And the reasoning behind it is interesting, shall we say. And the New Era Enterprise reported a couple of the talks that were given at this convention. This one was The Creation and Fall of Man by Mr. M.A. Howlett. His opening words in the article are interesting because it says God had a plan before the foundation of the world, but nobody knew about it. This is not something that JWs believe any longer. And, you know, I've been having these discussions with my Jehovah's Witness friend every Tuesday night, and we ended up at this discussion. So we were debating God's foreknowledge. I mean, if he can look ahead in time and see world empires, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, or even, 2,520 years to a world war, if he can really look forward and see those details, then why couldn't he see that man would sin, or Adam would sin, and make arrangements for that? It seemed like he had a singular goal in mind. Adam and Eve are going to populate the world, and oops, what do I do now? Plan B. Let's provide a savior. What did Jesus say? He said, if you're going to build a house, you should count the costs before you do it. Isn't that the kind of God that we see in Scripture? That he counts the cost. He looks at all the contingencies. He can see what could happen, or what possibly could happen, or even sees what could happen. Why can they see that God has foreknowledge with Daniel, but not with Adam and Eve? He was caught by surprise and had to make a plan B.
I'm going to interrupt you here. There could be an argument you're taking it the wrong way.
Okay.
God had a plan before the foundation of the world. No one knew about it. He knew about it. It just wasn't revealed yet.
But remember how Watchtowers reinterpreted this passage in Revelation 13. When they see that passage in Revelation 13, that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, they don't see it as before the creation of the world. They've reinterpreted that. I like your question. I'm going to answer that. Because when Adam sinned, now he had a plan that nobody knew about, except they did know about. Because he told Adam and Eve that the seed of the serpent would be crushed by their seed, that there was a promised seed coming who would destroy the seed of the serpent, or destroy the serpent, right? So that was a plan everybody knew about, including all the Jews. This is just a change of interpretation in how witnesses then looked at this phrase and God's foreknowledge versus how they look at it now. So if you're to count the cost before you, build something, how could this be a God who didn't count the cost? How could that happen? For me, it just doesn't make any sense. If you have foreknowledge in this thing, why don't you have foreknowledge in that thing? And you could say, well, he could have chose to see it or could have not to seen it. It's basically, oops, plan A is not going to work. Let's make a plan B. The Legal Foundations of a New World, the Watchtower, 1954. But basically they're saying that the scriptures just mentioned one single foundation, a structural foundation. That is the legal foundations. So the foundation of the world to them is the finished created earth. Foundations of the new world are made legal. It's just not a remodeling of the old way, but brand new system of things. And also, when it's before this earth, it's on the earth that others can see it.
Kind of like how they interpret it, the great company, the great crowd before the throne. Well, it's not before the throne, it's down here before.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, wow, okay.
Rutherford's talk, Civilization Doomed, was published in the New Era Enterprise on September 2nd, 1924. And we won't get into that quite yet, but we'll talk on that in just a little bit here. The Jehovah's Witnesses in the Divine Purpose book states that the clergy were indicted in the 1924 message. We're going to show from the newspapers what the newspapers of the time period reported and what they understood by the messages that were given at the convention. Did they understand they were indicted? We'll take a look.